Well, welcome back to those that have stayed with me this far. This is episode 3 in the series of the restoration of this classic vehicle. Now that the rust repair phase is over, it's time to move into bodywork. So that's all the process necessary to get the vehicle in primer so I can take it and have it painted at a professional shop. So let's start episode 3. I've turned my attention to the engine bay. I'm just painting and cleaning up different parts. It's not very fun. I really want to work on the body. I'm ultimately going to have the whole vehicle painted, but I've decided to prep it and prime it myself and then take it to a professional body shop to have the color, the beluga black and clear coat done in a proper paint booth. But so in the garage here, I can do the roof and the rear quarters, but all the other parts are elsewhere. And that's one of the big challenges of a project like this, is finding storage space. When you explode a vehicle like this, it's unbelievable how many parts show up, and you need to find a place to put them. So I've got parts all over my garage and my basement. This trailer is actually one of the main places I'm storing things. In this trailer, I've got 4 doors, the hood, fenders, the whole exhaust system, but it's not the only place where I have parts stored. If we go into the house, we can find the Range Rover Classic part. You can tell what season it is here with the Christmas tree, but look right there. There's a front driver's seat that I had recovered in leather recently, and so my wife is a good sport, just letting these parts sit in the middle of a room. But I've decided to take part of our basement. I've cleaned it out, and I'm going to use our basement as my own homemade paint booth, because it's really best to paint all these parts, or to prime all of these parts separately when they're off the vehicle instead of when it's all assembled. So this is the room I'll use. It's got good lighting. I've got some ability to put fans in some windows that are not in the picture here, but I can circulate the air. It gives me room to work on all the parts. And if you're wondering what's in that room back there in the back, believe it or not, it's more parts. So I've got another seat in here, and I've got the front bumpers and all the carpeting and all the sound deadening materials. So for this room, I will set up tables and sawhorses and stands, and I'll bring all those separated parts down. The 4 doors, the tailgate, the hood, the fenders. I'll do all the work in this room. It's temperature controlled. It's New Year's Eve right now, so it is cold outside. So even in the garage, it's cold. This is a better place to do all that work, because I'll end up spraying epoxy primer and urethane primer before this is over. It will be a good work environment for me. I did all the sanding necessary to prepare the parts for primer, and I decided to go with an ultimate kit, a complete kit sold by Eastwood that contains enough epoxy primer for multiple coats. It has sanding blocks, all different grits of sandpaper. It also has a gallon, well, 2 gallons once it's mixed, of urethane primer that follows the epoxy once you've got the surface in perfect shape. So it results in a really nice primer phase. This is actually a roll-on situation, not a spray. And there is some spray that you can use for door jambs, but this is a roll-on, which gives a really high build amount. And I did a lot of research, and it's a good system. So I'm going to use this system to do the primer phase. Of course, I will have the whole vehicle painted in a paint booth, as I mentioned earlier, but this is just for the primer and the sanding phase. So this is actually my first time going through the process of using guide coat and block sanding. So I'm really taking my time. I've decided to start working on the hood as my learning platform. So here's the sanding block that I'm using. This happens to be a DuraBlock. It comes from Eastwood, but you can see how long that is. This is 120 grit sandpaper. So I've been using that after the guide coat. So after the 2 coats of epoxy, you spray guide coat on the surface. very light coating of this. It's black. You start to block sand and it ends up removing almost all of that guide coat. But what happens is, any place where there's a little bit of depression, the guide coat remains. So these very small dark spots, it's just really thousandths of an inch, but the surface is a little lower in these spots than it is in the surrounding area. I could have this hood painted and in the color coat and the clear coat, and it would be very, very shiny, but what would happen is you would be able to see some of these, maybe not all of these. Some of these are extremely small. But what I'll be doing is using two products to fill in those low spots. For the slightly more significant locations, I'll use this premium body filler. And then for the very smallest pinholes and very small imperfections, I'll use Glazing Putty. These are both two-part products where you have to use an activator or a catalyst. So it's that makes for an excellent product. I've got a mixing board where you can tear these sheets off. It's kind of like wax paper to mix these products up. And then I'll use these different blades to apply this to the hood. So my mistake here is the body filler had started to cure, so it's not spreading very well. And I tried to repair what I had done, but it really is time to mix up some new filler. So jumping ahead, this is me mixing up glazing putty for the more minor imperfections that I need to fill. So really there's no hard science about the ratio. You just get a feeling of how much putty versus activator or catalyst. In this case, I think I put too much activator, so I come back and add a little bit more glazing putty, just eyeballing the ratio to try to get the ratio correct. There's a pretty wide tolerance if you get it wrong, but it's probably most important not to have too little activator. You don't want to run the risk of the putty never really setting up. But if you add too much activator, it just cures a little faster, and you have to be on your game. So all those parts in the basement are done. They're ready to go to the paint shop. So now I just need to come back out here to the garage and do the rear quarters and the roof in the same way with the epoxy and the urethane and the block sanding, and then everything will be ready to go when the time is right. But that'll end it for this episode. But stay tuned for the next episode. I'm going to get this body off the lift. I'm going to bring the other vehicle, the donor vehicle, and put it on the lift and separate the body from the chassis on the donor and start to scavenge parts, the best parts to put together for my ultimate build. So stay tuned for that episode.